Some family invitations feel less like celebrations and more like summonses. When my mother's cream-colored envelope arrived in the mail, embossed with gold lettering announcing her 60th birthday dinner, I stared at it for a long time before opening it. I already knew what was inside, and I already knew how the evening would end, with me feeling smaller than when I had arrived. I almost threw it away. Instead, I told myself that maybe this time would be different. Maybe age had softened my mother. Maybe years had finally taught her that comparing daughters only left scars that never truly healed. I should have known better. The private banquet room of the upscale restaurant buzzed with laughter when I stepped inside. Nearly 30 guests had gathered, relatives, old neighbors, church friends, and several of my mother's coworkers. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath warm chandeliers while soft piano music drifted through hidden speakers. The moment my mother spotted me, she smiled. But it wasn't the smile a mother gives a daughter she's happy to see. It was the polite smile reserved for someone who had arrived because they had to. "Emma," she said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "I'm surprised you actually came. I wouldn't miss your birthday," I answered, forcing a smile. She kissed my cheek without warmth. "Well, try not to disappear halfway through the evening like you usually do." A few people chuckled. It wasn't the first joke at my expense. It wouldn't be the last. I found my assigned seat near the end of the long table while conversations flowed around me. No one was intentionally rude, but I had become invisible over the years. My family had perfected the art of talking around me instead of to me. Then the room suddenly grew excited. "They're here." Everyone turned toward the entrance. My younger sister Claire entered wearing a stunning emerald dress that looked as though it belonged on a magazine cover. Her confidence filled the room before she even smiled. Walking beside her was her husband Daniel. Tall, calm, and sharply dressed, he carried himself with quiet discipline. His posture alone suggested years of military or government service. My mother hurried toward them. "There they are," she announced proudly, "my successful daughter and my incredible son-in-law." She hugged Claire tightly before taking Daniel's arm. "You all know Daniel works for the CIA." A ripple of impressed whispers spread across the room. Someone actually applauded. Daniel looked slightly uncomfortable with the attention, but he remained polite. "It's just my job," he said modestly. My mother wasn't finished. "I always tell everyone Claire married a real hero." Then she glanced directly at me. "Some people know how to choose wisely." The meaning landed exactly where she intended. Claire offered me an apologetic smile, but said nothing. She never did. Dinner began, and course after course arrived, yet the conversation always circled back to Claire and Daniel. Their beautiful home, their overseas travels, Daniel's government career, Claire's charity work, every accomplishment became another opportunity to remind everyone how proud my mother was. Whenever someone asked about me, the answers came from her instead of me. "Emma still works at that insurance office. She's been single for years. Poor thing never really recovered after her divorce. I always worried she lacked ambition." Each sentence chipped away at me. I quietly ate while pretending the food still had flavor. Halfway through dessert, one of my cousins smiled kindly. "So, Emma, what have you been up to lately?" I opened my mouth. "Oh." My mother interrupted with a dismissive laugh. "Nothing nearly as exciting as Claire." Several guests laughed politely. I lowered my eyes. It wasn't embarrassment anymore. It was exhaustion. Years of trying to earn love had finally worn me out. Then came the toast. My mother stood, lifting her champagne glass high. "I want to thank all of you for celebrating with me tonight." Everyone raised their glasses. "I've been blessed with 2 daughters." She paused dramatically. "Claire has given me every reason to be proud." She married an exceptional man who serves this country. She looked at Daniel with unmistakable admiration. Then her eyes found mine and Emma. The room became strangely quiet. Well, every family has one child who never quite reaches her potential. Scattered laughter echoed across the room. Someone awkwardly looked away. Someone else sipped their wine instead of meeting my eyes. My chest tightened. I slowly stood, forcing a small smile. "Happy birthday, Mom." I reached for my purse, deciding I'd had enough. As I slipped the strap over my shoulder, my jacket sleeve slid back, exposing the long, pale scar that stretched across my forearm. I barely noticed, but Daniel did. His conversation stopped mid-sentence. His face lost all color. He stared at the scar as though he'd seen a ghost. The room's laughter faded into silence. With a voice barely above a whisper, he looked directly at me and asked, for a long moment. No one moved. The cheerful sounds of clinking glasses and quiet conversations disappeared, replaced by an uneasy silence. Every pair of eyes shifted between Daniel and me. My mother frowned, clearly irritated that her birthday toast had been interrupted. Daniel wasn't looking at anyone else. His eyes remained fixed on the scar that ran from my wrist almost to my elbow. I asked, he repeated quietly, "Where did you get that scar?" I instinctively pulled my sleeve down. "It's nothing," I answered, "just an old injury." His expression didn't change. "No," he said, "it's not." The certainty in his voice caught everyone off guard. Claire gently touched his arm. "Daniel, what's going on?" Instead of answering her, he looked back at me. "Please." There was something in his eyes that wasn't curiosity. It was recognition. I let out a slow breath. "I was in Afghanistan," I admitted. Several guests blinked in surprise. My mother laughed awkwardly. "Emma volunteered overseas for a while after college. She never talks about it. Honestly, I forgot she even went. Forgot." The word hurt more than I expected. I hadn't gone on a vacation. I had spent nearly 2 years working with an international humanitarian organization, treating injured civilians in villages where hospitals barely existed. I had written letters home. I had sent photographs. I had called whenever satellite phones worked. My family simply hadn't paid much attention. It was outside Kandahar. I continued softly. I worked in a mobile medical clinic. Daniel slowly pulled out his chair but remained standing. When, about 11 years ago, his breathing became noticeably slower. "Tell me about the scar." I looked around the room. 30 guests watched silently, waiting for a story I had spent years trying to forget. It happened during an evacuation. The memories returned with painful clarity. Our convoy was leaving a village after treating several families. We thought the road had been secured. I paused. It wasn't. The room stayed silent. There was an explosion. I could still hear it. The first vehicle was destroyed almost instantly. Dust covered everything. People were screaming. Without realizing it, I rubbed the scar through my sleeve. I was thrown into a ditch. My arm was badly cut by metal fragments. Claire covered her mouth. But there were children trapped in one of the trucks. My voice trembled, so I went back. My mother stared at me as though hearing about a complete stranger. I helped pull out 2 nurses, 3 children, and an elderly man. Daniel hadn't looked away once. I don't remember much after that. I admitted. Someone kept telling me to stay awake. I remember helicopters. I shrugged gently. When I woke up days later, they said I'd lost a lot of blood. The banquet room was completely still. One of my uncles quietly whispered, "Why didn't we know this?" I almost laughed. "You did." Everyone looked confused. I told the family after I came home. I looked toward my mother. "You said there was no reason to keep talking about something that happened overseas because people had their own problems." My mother's face flushed. I don't remember saying that. No, I replied calmly. I know. Daniel finally spoke. Were you working under your legal name? I frowned. No. What name? The question sounded strangely urgent. My organization asked us to use shortened first names for security reasons. What was yours? I hesitated. Emily Carter. Daniel closed his eyes. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he slowly sat down, rubbing both hands across his face, as though trying to process something impossible. Claire leaned closer. Daniel, what is it? He looked at her, then back at me. There was a report. His voice was almost inaudible. A classified after-action report. Nobody interrupted him. It described an American civilian medic who ignored direct evacuation orders. I felt my heartbeat quicken. Daniel continued. She kept carrying wounded civilians to the helicopters while bleeding from her own arm. The room remained frozen. Our unit was told that several lives were saved because one volunteer refused to leave. He swallowed hard. Nobody knew much about her. His eyes met mine once more, only her field name. My fingers tightened around my purse. Daniel stood again, emotion clear on his face. My commanding officer never forgot that report. He took one slow step toward me. Neither my mother nor Claire spoke. Neither did anyone else. Then, with unmistakable respect, Daniel said the words that shattered everything my family believed they knew about me. You weren't just in Kandahar, Emma. His voice cracked slightly. You were the woman who became a legend among the people we served beside. The room fell into stunned silence as every eye turned from Daniel back to me. The silence in the banquet room was so complete that I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioner. No one laughed anymore. No one reached for another bite of dessert. 30 pairs of eyes rested on me, but I wished they wouldn't. I had spent years trying to leave Kandahar behind. I had never wanted to become the center of attention, especially not like this. Daniel stood motionless for a moment before turning to face the guests. I owe everyone an explanation, he said. His calm voice carried across the room with the confidence of someone used to speaking under pressure. My work prevents me from discussing most operations, and I intend to keep honoring that responsibility. But some stories deserve to be told when they reveal the truth about someone's character. He looked at me with genuine respect. Years ago, during a rescue operation near Kandahar, our personnel reviewed reports about a civilian medical volunteer who repeatedly risked her life during an attack. She ignored multiple chances to escape because wounded children and aid workers were still trapped. Several guests leaned forward. Daniel continued. The reports described her as fearless, but they also mentioned something even more remarkable. She never asked who the injured people were. She didn't care what country they came from, what language they spoke, or what uniform they wore. She simply refused to leave anyone behind. A quiet murmur spread around the room. My cousin Ethan looked at me in disbelief. You never told us any of this. I managed a small smile. No one asked. Those 4 words landed harder than I intended. My mother shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Emma, sweetheart, she interrupted, forcing a nervous laugh. Why would you keep something like that a secret? I looked directly at her. I didn't. The room fell silent again. I came home with stitches, nightmares, and months of physical therapy. I talked about what happened whenever someone asked, but every conversation ended with someone changing the subject. I paused before adding quietly. Eventually, I stopped trying. My mother's confident smile disappeared. Daniel nodded slowly. That doesn't surprise me. He reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and removed a small leather card holder. He wasn't showing classified information, only something personal. My closest friend served on one of the support teams involved in that operation. He explained. Years later, He told me about the unknown volunteer medic who became an example during training sessions. Claire frowned. Training sessions, Daniel nodded, not by name. Her identity remained protected, but instructors used her actions to teach one lesson. He looked around the room. Courage isn't measured by rank, titles, or recognition. It's measured by what someone does when everyone else is running away. The words seemed to echo through the room. My aunt quietly wiped away a tear. Another guest whispered, "Oh my goodness." Daniel turned toward me again. I never imagined I'd meet that woman. I looked down, embarrassed by the attention. I wasn't trying to be brave. I said softly, "There were children." "Exactly," Daniel replied. "That's why it mattered." For the first time all evening, the applause that filled the room wasn't polite. It was heartfelt. Several guests stood. Others followed until nearly everyone was on their feet. The sound of genuine respect echoed through the banquet hall. I didn't know where to look. My mother remained seated. Her champagne glass trembled slightly in her hand. When the applause finally faded, she cleared her throat. I suppose I never realized. Daniel turned toward her. "Mrs. Carter, may I ask you something?" She nodded uncertainly. "When Emma came home injured, did you ever ask what she'd been through?" She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. He continued gently, without anger. "Did you ever ask why she woke up screaming at night?" Still nothing. "Did you ever ask why she couldn't tolerate fireworks for years?" Tears welled in my mother's eyes. Daniel's voice softened. "Because if you had, you would have known long before tonight that the daughter you've spent years comparing to everyone else was carrying burdens most people could never imagine." The words struck the room harder than any accusation could have. Claire slowly lowered her head. "I should have asked too," she whispered. I reached over and squeezed her hand. "This isn't your fault alone." But my mother suddenly stood. "Emma," she began shakily. "I'm sorry." For the first time in my life, those words sounded sincere. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I smiled sadly. "I appreciate hearing that." She took one hopeful step toward me, but some wounds. I continued quietly, "Don't leave scars you can see." The room remained silent. No one defended my mother. No one tried to excuse the years of favoritism. At that moment, I realized something unexpected. I no longer needed their approval. For the first time in years, I felt lighter. Not because everyone finally knew who I had been in Kandahar, but because I had finally remembered who I was. 3 weeks after my mother's birthday dinner, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. It wasn't because I had become famous. It was because the truth had finally found its way to people who genuinely cared. Several relatives who had attended the dinner called to apologize. My aunt admitted she had believed every comparison my mother had ever made between Claire and me. "I thought you were distant," she confessed. "Now I realize you were just protecting yourself." Others admitted they had never noticed how often my mother interrupted me or dismissed my accomplishments. Once they saw it that night, they couldn't unsee it. For years, I had been treated like the family's disappointment. Now they understood I had simply been the family's quiet survivor. One afternoon, I received an unexpected invitation from a nonprofit organization that supported veterans and humanitarian aid workers. One of the guests at my mother's party served on its board and had shared my story. They weren't interested in making me a public hero. They wanted someone who understood service, sacrifice, and resilience. After thinking about it for several days, I accepted. Helping people had always given my life purpose. This opportunity simply allowed me to do it in a different way. Daniel called a few days later. "Would you mind meeting me for coffee?" he asked. When we met, he placed a small wooden box on the table between us. "I've been carrying this for years," he said. Inside was a challenge coin from his former unit. It's given only to people who remind us what real courage looks like. I immediately pushed the box back. I can't accept this. Actually, Daniel replied with a warm smile. Our team voted unanimously that you should have it. He paused before continuing. My best friend was one of the soldiers evacuated that day. I stared at him. He survived because your convoy refused to leave until every injured person was aboard the helicopters. His voice grew softer. He went home, married his college sweetheart, and now has 2 little girls. Daniel smiled. They exist because you stayed. Tears filled my eyes. For over a decade, I had carried only memories of fear, pain, and loss from Kandahar. I had never stopped to consider the lives that continued because of those terrible hours. That realization healed something inside me. Meanwhile, my mother's world had quietly changed. Friends who had once admired her constant praise of Claire began asking uncomfortable questions. Some gently pointed out how differently she had treated her daughters. Others admitted they had witnessed her cruel comments for years, but never spoken up. Without anyone attacking her, she was finally forced to confront the consequences of her own behavior. One evening, she knocked on my apartment door. When I opened it, she looked smaller somehow, older. Not because of age, because regret has a way of humbling people. I'm not here to ask you to forget, she said softly. I'm here because I finally understand what I did. We sat together in silence for several minutes. Then she whispered, I spent so much time celebrating what I thought success looked like that I completely missed the extraordinary daughter standing in front of me. I believed she meant every word. Years earlier, hearing that apology would have been everything I wanted. Now it felt different. I forgive you, I said gently, her eyes filled with hope, but forgiveness doesn't erase the past. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. I know. Our relationship will need time, I continued. Trust isn't rebuilt with one apology. It's rebuilt with consistent love. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. This time, I didn't pull away. Months later, I stood on the stage of a Veterans Appreciation event, speaking not about bravery, but about compassion. When the audience applauded, I noticed my mother and Claire sitting together in the front row. Neither tried to steal the moment. Neither made comparisons, they simply smiled. Afterward, Daniel shook my hand. You know, he said, people often think revenge means making someone suffer. I looked toward my mother, who was quietly helping volunteers stack chairs after the event. No, I replied with a peaceful smile. The sweetest revenge is becoming the person they never believed you could be. As I walked outside into the evening sunlight, I realized something I had spent years searching for. My worth had never depended on my mother's approval. It had always been mine. The scar on my arm would remain for the rest of my life. But now, whenever I looked at it, I no longer saw pain. I saw proof that even the deepest wounds can become reminders, not of what tried to break us, but of the strength that carried us through. And for the first time in many years, I walked forward without looking back.